A video just released by the Chinese government documents that the People's Liberation Army Navy recently had a significant operational milestone. During an ATC period off the coast of Shanghai, the PLN aircraft carrier Fujian, which was launched 3 years ago, already completed its first successful flight ops that included using the electromagnetic catapult system, better known by the acronym EMALS. To review, the Fujian is China's first domestically designed and built aircraft carrier featuring EMALS. The Chinese EMALS system is comparable to the advanced technology used on the U.S. Navy's newest carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford CVN-78, currently on deployment to the North Atlantic and Mediterranean Sea. The Fujian displaces about 80,000 tons compared to the Ford class that displaces 100,000 tons, which makes Fujian about the size of the decommissioned Forrestal class carriers designed in the 1950s, the more ordnance and longer range. The official Chinese video is basically an 8-minute highlight reel with the flight ops in random order. I'm going to break it down by reorganizing it into launch, mission, and recovery. First, we see Fujian sailing out of port, escorted by a few tugs. You can see the brown water in the wake, indicating that the channel isn't very deep. Then we see views from the bow looking aft and from above. Note that there are only 3 catapults compared to the U.S. Navy Nimitz and Ford class that have 4. That matters when comparing sortie generation rates of the carriers, arguably the most important combat variable. Now we're on the flight deck with a KJ-600 taxiing for launch. The KJ-600 is the PLN's version of the U.S. Navy's E-2 Hawkeye advanced early warning aircraft. Both feature twin turboprop engines and a large circular radar dome above the fuselage. Here's a view from what's known as the bubble, which is where the catapult officer is located during launches instead of standing on the flight deck. This technology is a copy of what's used on the American Nimitz-class carriers, the first of which was commissioned in the early 70s. Then we see some flight deck personnel, and while at a glance the 4 cranials to the right of the green one look red, they're probably the Chinese version of brown, because in the U.S. Navy red indicates ordnance handlers. Not sure if that's the same for the PLN. You'll note that none of the aircraft operating around Fujian are armed in this video, which makes sense since this is the first time they've conducted flight ops. A guy in a white float coat, which aboard American carriers indicates safety personnel, directs the aircraft to taxi forward into the shuttle. This particular signal isn't used by the U.S. Navy when launching aircraft. A taxi director in yellow, the same color for the U.S. Navy, gives the signal for the KJ-600 to spread its wings for launch. And here's a view of that happening from the bubble. Then a green shirt flashes the weight board to verify the weight launch of the aircraft with the co-pilot before showing the number to the shooter who determines the EMALS settings for launch. Over the green shirt's shoulder, you can see 032, and what you can't see are the other 3 zeros indicating 32,000 kilograms, which converts to just over 70,000 pounds, which is about 15,000 pounds heavier than the max launch weight of an E-2 Hawkeye. Next, we see a J-35, the PLN's 5th-generation fighter, being taxied from the hangar bay onto one of the elevators. Again, note the 4-digit side number, in this case, 3506. The elevator goes up with what looks like a plane captain in the cockpit, and the airplane randomly flanked by a bunch of blue shirts. Taxiing around the flight deck here, and you can see that another J-35, side number 3505, has a physical heads-up display mounted in front of the pilot, which is different from the F-35 that features a virtual heads-up display in the visor of the pilot's helmet, suggesting that the Chinese 5th-generation technology may not be as advanced as the Americans is, or that the Chinese saw how much trouble the F-35 had while designing the helmet, so they decided to skip that part in order to get the airplane into service without the 5-year helmet tech delay that the Americans suffered. Here you can see that the J-35 has 2 engines instead of the F-35's single engine. The aircraft taxis onto what would be catapult number 2 on an American carrier, and the jet blast deflector comes up. Again, the deck crew puts the hull back in place and ensures it seats properly as the catapult goes into tension. The pilot orders the weight board. We can't see any of the digits in this view, but the J-35's max takeoff weight is 62,000 pounds, which is about 8,000 pounds less than an F-35. Note that the airplane's external lights are on, something U.S. Navy air wings keep off during daytime flight operations. This J-35 also doesn't do a clearing turn, but climbs straight away in full afterburner. Aircraft 3506 is followed by 3507, and the deck crew goes through the same motions to get the pilot into the shuttle. The pilot salutes, just like American carrier pilots do when they're ready for launch, and up he goes. The J-35s are followed by a J-15, which the Chinese developed using the Russian Su-27 design, an action that caused the Russians to withdraw from a deal to sell the Chinese Su-33s because of the violation of intellectual property agreements. The Chinese came into the possession of a Ukrainian Su-33 and wound up reverse engineering it to incorporate many of the features into the J-15. The PLN has developed 2 carrier-based versions of the J-15, a fighter attack version and an electronic attack version like the U.S. Navy's EA-18G Growler. Aircraft 1513 taxis onto Cat 2 as the JBD goes up behind it. This side view shows the intake design taken from the Russians that the Russians copied from the American F-14 design. Once again, the white shirts check the holdback and the launch bar and the shuttle. And as the previous aircraft did, the J-15 climbed straight away with a clearing turn. Next, we see a formation of J-35s and J-15s obviously shot at a different time because there are more than two of them, and the J-15s are carrying missiles. Here's a head-on view of one of the J-35 pilots. Then we see a J-35 in the landing pattern. Looks like this one's on downwind leg. Another view from the pilot concentrating on final approach. Cut away to the airplane in the groove, this one with its hook up, and then the view from the starboard side of the Fujian, most likely shot from the helicopter, of the airplane trapping on the deck. Here's a view from the island of the jet catching the 2-wire. Note that Fujian has 4 wires like U.S. Navy carriers used to. The Ford class only has 3. Here we see a green shirt making sure the wire doesn't tangle as it retracts, just like American flight deck crews do. Next, we have what appears to be a J-15 coming into the break. Not sure the exact altitude, but it looks higher than the 800-foot dictated by the U.S. Navy's Case 1 pattern. Another view from the starboard side of the airplane successfully catching a wire. And then a cool shot from under the catwalk at the stern, followed by aircraft 1516 catching a 3-wire. Finally, we see the KJ-600 on downwind, followed by the view from the co-pilot seat. Note the Fresnel lens on the left side, which gives the pilot glide slope information, just like the American system. Also note the absence of any other airplanes on the flight deck. The airplane traps and the green shirts run out to make sure the wire retracts properly as the yellow shirt takes control at the end of the runout. Note the tail of a helicopter on the right side of the frame. The Chinese do have a long way to match the U.S. Navy's carrier air power in terms of number of hulls and attached air wing sortie generation capability. Since this video is produced by the Chinese government, note how clean everything is. The lines on the flight deck are still bright, and the sailors' clothing and float coats look like they were just issued. We don't know if the Fujian has had any of the growing pains like those suffered by the USS Gerald R. Ford. Regardless of those realities, what this video shows is the PLN has gone from launching the ship to basic operational capability in 3 years, which is a fraction of what it took Ford. Further, at this time, Ford cannot operate with F-35s for an extended period because the engines are too hot for the existing jet blast deflectors, and the intermediate maintenance facilities aren't secure for handling classified parts of the 5th-generation jet. As the American industrial base continues to struggle to return to some semblance of the glory years of the 20th century, most acutely those companies involved in building warships, Fujian's recent flight ops demonstrate China's carrier program is rapidly maturing, and with it comes a potential shift in the strategic landscape of the Asia-Pacific region. Senior Chinese military officials have recently claimed that the next carrier after Fujian is already on the drawing board, and they've hinted that it will be nuclear-powered, another technological leap for the PLN. In any case, the U.S. Navy and our allies need to pay attention and focus the defense effort accordingly. Alright, that'll do it for this episode. If you're not already a subscriber, become one so you don't miss anything. And in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.